This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Cunnington. North are in front.
Yes, hello, welcome back to North Pod. It is loss number 19 in a row. Hopefully we'll recovered after another disappointing loss. I don't know if it gets easier or it gets more predictable. I don't know how many times I've turned to someone and said, mate, you haven't watched North Melbourne this year. Like, I know what's going to happen. And the game, for the most part, unfortunately went the way that a lot of us were probably expecting it. We were competitive, but not good enough to get the win. Just another one of those games with some positive signs, but just too many errors, too many mistakes, too many things that we should be able to do well, but that we didn't. Too much of that. I think at one point I said to the people that I was watching the game with, it's just going to be a case of who makes the least mistakes and they're going to win. And there is a strong chance that it's not going to be North Melbourne making the least mistakes. So, yeah, unfortunately, another loss. Only 2 matches to go for the year, so I suppose you can look at it from that perspective. We've got an extra match this year. Normally it's 22. We've got the 23 this year, so it's lucky for us that we've got another opportunity to lose a game. Cunners was the real highlight of the game. I will talk about him a little bit later on, but I think the fact that it wasn't a belting by the Dons sort of helped to send him off positively. I think, whilst obviously the result was disappointing and we would have loved to send him out on a win, I think the fact that it was just the 9 points, it made it feel like, we could send him off in mostly a positive way, and it wasn't this juxtaposition between us getting smashed by 10 goals and then everyone clapping him off the ground. I think that would have felt a bit awkward, and I wouldn't have wanted that to be the case. It kind of reminds me of that elimination final in Adelaide when we were sending off Boomer and Drury Petrie and Ferrito and Del Santo, I think, were the 4 at that game. But, we got thoroughly beaten, and, that was the last game that all of them played for us. I think, I know Petrie went on and played at West Coast for a year or two after that. But it was nice to be able to send Cunners off at least by playing not too bad. The match result, if you missed it, was North Melbourne 77, lost to Essendon 86. Pretty accurate game in front of goals for both sides, which, contributed to what otherwise wouldn't have been a super high-scoring game. If it was more inaccurate, I think we probably would have seen more like a win of 60 to 70 odd, but accurate kicking made it, a decently scoring game. The story of the game for us has to be the entries inside 50. I don't know, maybe a listener can let me know how many podcasts I've mentioned this in, but our entries inside 50 in that first half just cost us so dearly. It did get a little bit better as the match went on, but not a heap. Finished the game at around 41% efficiency when going inside 50, which is about average for us this year. That's not a good number for what it's worth, but we sort of, as I said, the second half rectified our entries a little bit. But yeah, in that first half, we had so many great opportunities that we just butchered, either by completely miskicking it or kicking it long and high and giving the Essendon defenders a chance to intercept mark or spoil. I didn't think any of the Essendon defenders played a super fantastic game, but we made it really easy for them at times with the way that we were going inside 50. Yeah, it's the same as we've done all year. We weren't able to capitalise on our wins at the stoppages. We actually won the stoppages 39 to 34. So, not a massive win, but we did win it. But we weren't able to capitalise on that in terms of the amount of times that we went inside 50 or the ways that we went inside 50. It's kind of a miracle that Larkey was able to score 5 goals in the end from what he got. He probably should have had many more than that. Anyway, yeah, we weren't as bad in the second half, but we really needed to be able to build on that lead given the kind of entries that we were having in that first half. We only went in at halftime ahead by 4 points, by 5 points. And really, we probably should have been ahead by 3 or 4 goals. And, if that's the case, it's a much different game in the second half. We've got a bit of a lead to defend. Because I thought it was, we were pretty evenly matched in that second half. So, yeah, I mean, it's the classic situation where I come here and podcast about the 2 or 3 things that if they were different, we would have won. And I think, that's the sign of where we're at as a football team ultimately. Every single week, there's 2 or 3 things where if we could fix those things up, we're a big chance to win. But we are just not capable of getting everything right in one match. So, if the other side come to play, chances are we're not coming away with the chocolates. In terms of the 3 stars, this is the 2 best performing North Melbourne players and the best opposition player. I had to go with Larkey as our best player today. 7 disposals only, so not much the football, but super, super efficient, had 5 marks. One of those was a fantastic contested grab. Kicked 5 goals, 1. And really, as I said a couple of minutes ago, should have had a couple of more. And that's for 2 reasons. If the entries inside 50 were a little bit cleaner, we would have given him much better opportunity, particularly, as I said, in that first half. I've said on the pod before that I'm not into whacking the umpires and whatnot, but gee, I'll tell you what, it's the classic. If he was umpired the same way as some of the other key forwards in the league were umpired, he'd have an extra 10 or 15 goals this year. There were some really horrible non-calls on him. Anyway, we can't do anything about it. It is what it is. I thought the entire match, North Melbourne didn't play well, Essendon didn't play well, and I thought the umpires were pretty poor. And early on, I think North Melbourne was not getting the rub of the green at all, but there were other times in the game where I thought, gee, we were lucky to get away with that. I just don't think anyone really hit the ground had much of a great performance. So yeah, Larkey had the 5. I think on balance, he played a sort of 7 or 8 goal game just in terms of how well he was playing. There was one goal in the last quarter where he, I thought it was going to be rushed through for a point, and he just wanted it more, broke 2 tackles, kicked a goal from the square under some pretty serious pressure. So, yeah, fantastic game from Nick. Takes his tally, I think, to 56 goals for the, if he kicked 2 or 3 for the next couple of games and hit 60, that would be a fantastic performance from a North Melbourne side, given the amount of entries that he gets and the quality of entries. If he could kick 60 goals for the year, that would be truly, truly something. The second star for North, I think, probably has to go to Harry Sheezel. 32 disposals, 6 marks, 3 tackles, 2 goal assists, 3 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, went at 94%. So just another complete performance. Looked a class above with the ball. He is one of those players that I do want kicking inside 50 for us. He does look good going inside 50 and can hit a target, and also is so clean by hand as well. He did make an error late in the game, kicking out, allowed it to be smothered, but aside from that, really, it's another faultless game. And yeah, I mean, he's really, I think, done exactly the job that Nick Dacos did last year at Collingwood. I think he's a massive chance for the rising star. I know there's a lot of people that think Will Ashcroft is a shoo-in for that, and I actually don't have strong feelings about it, because at the end of the day, it doesn't make a big difference to us. We've still got him as a player, and if he gets the rising star, fantastic. And if he doesn't, whatever, we still know that we think he's probably the best performed rookie to this point. So yeah, another great performance from Sheezel. Let's not get tied up in arguing about if he deserves the rising star or not. Let's just be happy with the fact that we've got a fantastic player. And yeah, I would love to see him thrown forward, but it's hard to argue this year with the way that he's playing, moving him out of defence. I think it's a really tough spot to be in for the team selectors and the match committee, because I do think we need he or Taron Thomas in the back line, and Taron's playing so well through the middle at the moment, it doesn't make sense to move him back there. So a great game from Shees. I thought LDU was good. Taron Thomas was good. Cunna's really wound the clock back in his last game. So they were all kind of in with a chance for the votes, but yeah, I went with Sheezel and Larkey. In terms of the best Essendon player, I think, Parrish was pretty good. There's a couple of others that were in with a chance, but I thought, particularly given his profile, Nick Martin just killed us. 32 disposals, 6 marks, kicked 3 goals, 4 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, and was just damaging and efficient all day. Every time, something was happening for Essendon, he was either on the end of it or making it happen. And I just couldn't help but when watching him, he's obviously a pretty young player. He's only 22, and he's the sort of player that opposition fans won't have seen much of. He's not a high-profile player, and he's played 42 games. He's only in his infancy as a player, but he is exactly the sort of player that we need to be developing. And when I say that, he's rookie picked, doesn't come in with highly talented credentials, but has really cemented his place in the side, and we need players like that where we're getting diamonds out of the rough, so to speak, and developing them. It's been a massive issue for us over the last 4 or 5 years is we just haven't had many of those players come out of nowhere. We've developed them, and all of a sudden they're immediate best 22 players. We just don't have them. So he was the exact sort of player that we need. Played a fantastic game, and I honestly think you take him out of the game, it's line ball as to who wins. So yeah, they're the 3 stars. Before I jump into our usual positives and negatives, just a quick call to action to share me out with any North Melbourne fans that help me to get the word out there. Subscribe to the podcast on your chosen podcast service. Leave me a review if you can on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And get involved with my social media at NorthPod Show on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Threads, TikTok, you name it. You can find me there. We always start with the negatives here on the NorthPod podcast. So, as you can imagine, there's always a few, and we're never short. So, I will try and keep this relatively upbeat because it was a solid performance, not one of our worst ones, but plenty of things to talk about. I alluded to it earlier, so I'm not going to go too much into this one, but the entries inside 50 were just atrocious in that first half. I don't want to go back and look at it, to be honest, but from the notes that I made while I was watching, Ford shinned one, which was laughable, and then skidded one along the ground later in the game. He actually didn't have a great game. It was patchy. He had a good little patch towards the end of the match, took a couple of good marks and kicked a goal, but his going inside 50 I didn't like. Sheezel and LDU were the two that looked like they could actually kick it inside 50 with some verve and be dangerous, but there was just too often 2 others were bombing it in really high rather than trying to hit someone with a low bullet. And I think, the difference between the way that we were kicking in versus the way that Essendon delivered it to Langford just poles apart. Like, he was always marking it kind of at his waist or knee height on the lead, whereas we were often having to compete in the air with 3 or 4 Essendon players because the ball's been kicked so long and given so much time in the air. So it's just another, I think across the year I've seen some real general improvement in terms of the way that we kick it forward and kick it inside 50, but we've still got a long way to go there, and it's a far cry from the days of Boomer running along the wing and putting it on Petrie's chest 10 years or so ago. We've got a long way to go there. That does link really nicely into my second point, which is just the poor skills throughout the game, especially late. I think there was a lot of missed kicks, missed handballs. In fairness, Essendon probably missed more handballs than we did. There was a lot of Essendon handballs that went at their feet or went behind them, and we had a couple of those, but our kicking just killed us at times. There was so many examples that you could, clip out. I'm sure someone on Fox Footy is going to clip out all the missed kicks because there were just too many. I'm going to talk about a couple. I alluded to that one earlier where Sheezel had a kick out after a point and just used up too much time and got smothered. There were several other smothers in that last quarter where, great pressure from the Essendon players, but I feel like we've got to be better there and understand how much time we have. Sheezel was just a bit of a brain fade, I think. Like, I'm not he's the least of our problems, let's be honest. He's playing really well in other areas. But yeah, just he had that one. We found it really hard to exit defensive 50 sort of for the first half of that last quarter. It was really stuck in Essendon's half, and I thought our defence actually held up pretty well given we weren't able to transition the ball out. Goda, I think this was in the second quarter, not the last, but he had two really poor kicks in a row. He pulled on a tackle, earned himself a holding the ball decision, like free kick 4, and then kicked it straight to an Essendon player. Then goes and grabs the intercept mark, so makes up for his poor work, and then another poor kick across goal, which ended up resulting in Jai Menzies kicking a goal. But it was just 2 in a row, and I love the fact that he kept backing himself, but it's those that's a great example of the skills that we're just not nailing at the moment. Goda's played 9 or 10 games, whatever it is. He's got lots of development to go. So again, like Sheezel, I'm not saying, gee, let's get rid of Goda, but we just have too many of our players that are prone to poor skill errors. Darcy Tucker dropped an absolute sitter today. I'm really not sure why he's still getting a game. Yeah, just the skills have to get better, and I think that's something that's going to come with another preseason. I think, because I do think a big reason for our poor skills is fatigue. Because early on in the game, sure, we were bombing it inside 50 without looking, but at least we were getting it inside 50, and the skills we were looking a little cleaner at that point. The next point is both ruckmen were poor. I thought not a great day for our rucks. Goldie had 5 disposals, 0 marks, 23 hitouts. Cherry played a fair bit of the game forward, had 12 disposals, 1 mark, 17 hitouts. So between our 2 ruckmen who, played a lot of the game, we had 1 mark and 17 disposals. I think that's a big issue with us at the moment is we just do not have players who can take marks, and in particular contested marks. I think it's essentially Ben Mackay can take a mark intercepting in defence. Nick Larkey can take a mark when the ball's at least a 50-50 rather than to his disadvantage. But yeah, we need other players who can take big marks, and one of those players should be the ruckman. You should have a ruckman that's taking 3 or 4 marks a game would be great at this point. But to have them with 0 and 1 each, it's just they should be having a field day against Phillips and Bryan. Like Andrew Phillips is an absolute journeyman, but by no means a good ruckman. And Bryan's just beginning. He's new, he's raw. But the hitouts to advantage was about even. Like, I thought Bryan was probably the best ruckman, to be honest. That being said, at one point, Taron Thomas went in the ruck in the forward line against Bryan, and Bryan hit it straight to Simpkin, and he kicked a goal. That was the best service that our rucks gave the mids all day. It was, just a real dirty day for the ruckman. I thought our midfielders did pretty well. As we'll talk about later on, we did win the clearances, so there wasn't. It wasn't as though we were smashing the clearances as well. I thought the midfielders did a good job of sharking and making the most of the hitouts that they got. But I think it was after the ball hit the ground that I was more concerned. Like Goldie looked so slow today, absolutely no impact around the ground, and Cherry was able to impact the ruck contest, but beyond that, similarly looked sluggish. And he's one of those players that, I'm a Cherry fan. I think he's got potential, but he is one of those players that looks like he's going in slow motion at times. And part of that is his thoughts, and part of that is just his limbs moving slowly, I think. Yeah, it was not a great day for the rucks, and I just think that space is a watch going into next year. It's something to look really closely at during the draft and trade period, I think, because I'll talk about it in a little bit later on, but it sounds as though Goldie may play on for us, which I think has some positives, but I do have some concerns about that. So there's a little teaser for you for later on. A couple more. We just weren't able to get the ball off Essendon at times. They really controlled the tempo for longer periods, I think. Like every game of football, there was swings in momentum, and it wasn't all one-way traffic, but I thought, they were able to possess the ball for a bit longer. They did have more marks, more possessions, more time with the ball. So it was just around, we put on a heap of pressure, but we weren't able to exert that when it became an uncontested game. And Essendon was certainly able to transition it more effectively than us, particularly after the first quarter. I thought Mackay did a really good job of intercepting in quarter one, but then they really adjusted to that and kind of quelled his influence. And he didn't have a bad game, but he started hot with 3 or 4 intercept marks and then wasn't able to do much of that for the rest of the game. So I thought that was a really good adjustment by the Dons, but you'd love to see us adjusting as well and figuring out how to, counter their counter, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's been a bit of a consistent theme this year that teams are able to pass it around and transition through our whole ground defence too easily. And whilst I don't think they cut us up significantly today, it was so much more noticeable that they were able to transition it more easily than us. I think our best transitions were often from a turnover or a bit of a 50-50 kick that comes off, whereas I thought for the most part Essendon's transitions were pretty intentional, and whilst sometimes they did invite pressure and let us in, they were good on the spread at transitioning it and getting it out the back. So yeah, that's just something to look for. I think anyone watching the game would know this and would notice this, but we just really need some help for poor Nick Larkey. Cherry is not a permanent forward. He's a resting ruckman that can spend 10-20% of the game forward, but he was playing more like 50% of the game forward. We know that Coleman Jones, Comben and Zerha are all out, and they're kind of our next best marking forward options. But it's just so noticeable that the defence is really only worrying about containing Larkey, and they're pretty happy to live with everyone else. And, we've seen over the past couple of weeks that one of our other mediums or smalls is capable. We saw that from Ford last week when he kicked 3 in that first quarter. We saw that from Paul Curtis against West Coast when he kicked the four goals. They're capable now and then, but they're not going to consistently at this stage damage a side that just decides to not ignore them, but focus their energy on stopping Nick. So we desperately need someone else. And, as I said, it's a lot of it for the second half this year's been through unavailability, but having Cherry or Goldstein as the other one up forward, I just don't think is working. And I know it's all we've got at the moment, but it's just, that's a big issue and something that needs to be addressed next year. Hopefully Coleman Jones and Comben and Zerha can stay fit. But Larkey just desperately needs someone else that can be damaging so that he doesn't have 3 on him every single time. Last negative, I know it seems like a lot for a game that we only lost by 9 points, but I did have a lot of notes on this one. I've said this a couple of times this year, I think it was too much left to too few. I'll just reel off a few here in no particular order. I thought Tucker had another pretty poor game, including dropping just an absolute sitter of a mark. And while they held up quite well defensively, I don't think our defenders were able to generate much drive and ball movement from defence. Archer ended up being subbed out. McDonald, Zeeble, Core, Mackay. None of them, as I said, they defended well, but when we had the ball, they just didn't look like they were dangerous in terms of the way that they were moving it. Sheezel was really the only one capable of giving us some drive off half back. I thought Ford was pretty error prone today. Lazaro essentially came on as the sub and had a negative impact. Ran too fast. I got paid a free kick against running too far under virtually no pressure. 70 metres out from goal. That was, you just can't make it up. Paul Curtis and Turner similarly were great defensively, but really unable to impact the game on offense. I mean, I could go on. Like, the list is long, but you get the idea. It was just, we don't have these players or enough players that can play both sides of the game at the same time. Because whilst our defending was pretty good today, it wasn't elite, but it was pretty good, we just weren't able to give enough offensively. And if we took out Larkey, LDU and Sheezel, I really don't know what it would have looked like today. But anyway, that's all of the negatives. As I said earlier, we did actually play a relatively good game as a side. There are some positives to whip through, so let's look at that now. I think I've gone 25 odd minutes in the podcast at this point. I need to talk about Ben Cunnington. What a way to depart the game. 2 goals, one at the start, one at the end. 24 disposals, 10 clearances. Just an absolute vintage Ben Cunnington performance. Didn't have a lot of metres gained, but his handballs were crucial to getting a spread. And yeah, like a lot of those 10 clearances would have been him hand passing it out to someone like Taron Thomas who kicked it forward. Aside from getting the win, like not much more we could have hoped for in terms of sending him off positively. That first goal that he kicked, second goal of the game, LDU found him with a handball and he just sent it through, and every single player or North Melbourne player on the field got around him. The crowd loved it. You could see Essendon supporters were even giving him a clap at that point. It was just, I was a bit worried about him having this farewell game because we know he hasn't been super fit. His form in the VFL hasn't been great. But he only played about 2/3 of the game. It seemed like he and Wardlaw were essentially subbing off and on at the same time. And it was just an absolute vintage Cunnington performance given what he can provide for us at the moment. It was fantastic to see the respect from both teams and supporters, just in awe of what he does and who he is as a human, I guess. Obviously, there was the big song and dance at the end with him being chaired off through the guard of honour of both sides, and massive amount of the crowd, including Essendon supporters, stuck around for that, which I thought was great. There was, none of that kind of nastiness or dismissiveness that you can have, and I do think a lot of that comes down to his cancer diagnosis, in that, people don't just see him as a retiring football player, they see him as this fantastic bloke who's gone through so much adversity and came out the other side. So, it was just, as I said, except for the win, we couldn't have expected much more in terms of sending Cunners off. There was a family sitting in front of me at the game where the parents went up to leave or got up to leave after the game, and the son, who, I don't know, he would have been primary school aged, I think, said, "No, wait, I want to watch Cunnington come off," and he was an Essendon supporter. So it just shows to what extent there's respect for him in the game, and it was really wholesome. I think that's the only way I would describe it. Super wholesome, and it was fantastic to see that he was able to play a great game and have a good influence in his final match, and to be respected by both sets of fans like that was really fantastic. So I will gush about him, I'm sure, a little bit later on in the podcast again, but fantastic positive there from Cunners. If we move away from that and talk more broadly about the game, I thought our tackle pressure was pretty consistently strong throughout the game. We finished with 63 tackles, which was only one more than Essendon. Wardlaw led the way. He had 9 tackles from only 55% game time. It seemed like they were easing him back in after his hamstring injury, and as I said, I think that he and Cunnington were essentially playing a bit of a tag team role. But for him to have 9 tackles in 55% game time was fantastic. Curtis had 8, Turner and McDonald had 4. There were several players with 3. We tackled hard and consistently. I thought when the ball was in close, we did make it hard for Essendon to get it out and be effective. And sure, I don't think their skills were fantastic. I mentioned that they were handballing it to teammates' feet a bit. I do think part of that was the pressure we were putting on, and part of it was, genuine skill errors. But the tackling was good. I thought our corralling was quite effective. We played quite a physical game without being too aggressive and giving away silly free kicks. That's always the balance. You kind of want to play that unsociable, physical, annoying style of football, but you don't want that to escalate into giving away silly free kicks or ending up in a big scuffle. There was a couple of little mini scuffles that happened throughout the game, but nothing that caused too much damage or cost anyone any goals. So I just thought our pressure was strong. Essendon did match us particularly late for the pressure. As I said, they really locked it in there inside 50 in that last quarter for a long period, but I don't think there were too many Essendon players that would have come off thinking that they've had it their own way. We saw Curtis Taylor go to Zach Merritt and try his best to shut him down. I thought he did a pretty solid job. Merritt still got 20-odd disposals, but his influence was down and he didn't absolutely torch us like he did last time. And that was a decent performance from Curtis in a bit of a tagging role, something that we haven't seen him do much of. He wasn't able to have much of himself, but obviously that wasn't his first priority. His first priority was to limit Merritt's influence, and I think he did that. So, yeah, pressure was great. I thought Jaden Stevenson didn't have a great game, but it was good to see him hit the scoreboard today. He's been really struggling to score goals. He hasn't kicked one in the last month or so, but he finished up today with 2 goals from his 13 disposals. One was a gimme that could have been his or Paul Curtis. Curtis handballed it to him, but the other was a great marking goal early in the game. So I just think, it was a good performance without being great, and I think we need this to kind of be his floor of what he gives out when he's not having a great game, like kick a goal or two, and then make a bit of something elsewhere on the field. This is I think I've summarised it well there. This is what we need to see from him when it's not going his way, because we know that he's capable of a 3 or 4 goal performance, but that's obviously not going to happen every week. So when it's not going his way, you want to be able to see him just be opportunistic, kick a couple. And he was able to do that today, which was good. It's just around getting him more involved more often. And I think we could say that about pretty much every player in our forward line except for Nick Larkey. I sort of alluded to it earlier, but it was another solid performance from the defenders in terms of their defensive work. Core saved a goal or two directly with his actions. There was one late where he ran back with the flight. It must have been in the third quarter, actually, because I'm just thinking about what end it happened. But he ran back with the flight and was able to take a mark in front of an Essendon player. I mentioned it as well. Mackay intercepted really well early and still managed to get in the way as the game went on. And the smalls and mediums, the Zeebles and McDonalds, etc., they defended everything else pretty well, I thought. Peter Wright and Langford were opportunistic, but they did not dominate the game at all, I wouldn't have said. And as I mentioned earlier, Langford was hit really well on the lead a couple of times and finished with 3 goals, but it was a quiet 3 goals. It was more like a Jaden Stevenson game as opposed to a Nick Larkey game where he's kicked the 5. I definitely think Larkey was the best performing forward on the ground. So the defenders did a pretty good job. We're all a bit worried about what next year looks like in defence, and I think the last month or so has shown that maybe Core, under the right coaching and the right setup, it's possible that he could get the job done. But part of me wishes that Ben Mackay didn't play as well as he did, because he was putting on a bit of an audition for Essendon, and I think whilst it's easy to make light of it, there's no doubt that teams have a look at opposition players when they're playing against them and go, gee, he was hard to stop. What about him? Obviously, he's already been heavily linked to Essendon, so it's nothing new, but it does look increasingly likely that he's going to leave, and quite possibly to Essendon. So did himself every favour today in terms of performing pretty well on the big stage, I would say. And the final positive, I think, I've used this as a positive a couple of times, and it does feel a bit like a cop-out, but it's true. We were in the game until really late. Kicked a couple of goals late in that fourth quarter, and the crowd really got up and about, and you got the sense that we had a bit of momentum, but we just weren't quite able to capitalise and get in front. But really, until Essendon kicked that goal with about a minute to go, we were still in it. This is exactly what we need to do. We need to compete with these middle-tier sides. We've done this with Essendon twice this year now, lost by 6 points in the middle of the year and lost by 9 today. So very competitive, and we obviously led for big periods of the game today as well. It's just about learning to win now. We can be competitive. We've shown that. We have been at times way more competitive this year than we were over the last couple. We've still had our fair share of bad games, don't get me wrong, but the competitiveness is there. It's just converting that to a win, and obviously we're all hoping that we're able to snag one of the last couple. But even if we're not, at least we're not heading to the end of the year on the back of back-to-back 10-goal losses. We've just got to keep practicing what it takes to take the lead and hold the lead late in a game like this. So, overall, a good performance, frustrating performance. No one's happy with a loss, but there was some positives there to take away from it. That's all for the game review. If we just have a quick look at other things from the week. There's no VFL game. It's a bye for us this week. So the final VFL match for the home and away season is next week against Richmond. So looks like we will make finals. It's just in what capacity by the looks of it. A win against Richmond next week would seal it. It would be great for the boys to make the VFL finals and, for a couple of them to continue their season for a couple more weeks. So we'll have a look at what happens next week with that, I guess. Then the two little pieces of news from the week. Obviously, Cunnington retiring. I am going to do another bonus pod like I did for Jack Zeeble. So I'm not going to talk too much about it here, but I feel like everyone in this day and age is on social media in some capacity. There's been so much fantastic stuff from Cunners retiring in social media this week in terms of interviews with him and former players. We saw Andrew Swallow come down from Queensland to be on a bit of a panel talking about Cunners during the week with Clarko and Zeeble and co. We've seen him mic'd up at training, which he would have hated, but we got a bit of an insight. And he's obviously not going to be as natural as he would normally be when he's mic'd up, but we could see a bit of his personality there. We've seen his wife and his family and his kids at training this week. So there's been such a feel-good atmosphere, I think, from just emanating from the club this week, and they've done a great job, the social media team, in kind of communicating that to fans, I think. Yeah, obviously really sad to see Cunners go, but I think the way it's been handled and whatnot this week was fantastic, and we know that he's a really shy guy, doesn't love the media, and I feel like every time he's been interviewed this week, he's just talked about, going back to the farm and living his best life. So, yeah, obviously can't be happy. I'm so super, super happy for him. Anyway, as I said, I'll do another podcast for him, just maybe a 15, 20-minute episode like I did for Jack Zeeble, and release that during the week if you're interested in hearing a bit more of my thoughts on Ben. But yeah, I just feel like acknowledging him for a quick couple of minutes here probably doesn't do justice to the 15 or so years that he's given us. So yeah, look forward to that during the week. The only other piece of news, I think everyone who's listening to podcasts might be onto this already, but Brady Rawlings was on the Gettable podcast, which is afl.com.au's sort of trading and player movement and player development podcast. He talked about Goldie potentially going around again. I thought that was my big takeaway. He talked a bit about Mackay, but didn't really give us much new information. But this was where the idea of Goldstein going around for another year was brought up most prominently, I think. So that's interesting. It looks like they're going to try and negotiate something to get him on the list for next year and keep him playing. I think, whilst that's probably great for us being competitive, I do worry around what this means for us, our capacity to develop Cherry and CCJ under those circumstances. I know Glenn, friend of the podcast, had him on for the Geelong episode, is very excited because if this was to happen, it gives him a great chance of hitting the 10,000 hit-outs. I think he's got about 200 left to go, so he's not going to get there this year, but if he was able to play on and play 5 or 6 games next year, he very well might. But yeah, I'm happy for him to go around again if the expectation is that he's playing VFL most weeks. And I love Goldie. We really need to develop our ruck stocks for the future, and I don't think playing him does that well enough for us. So yeah, it's a bit of a watch this space, I guess. I think I'm feeling pretty brutal and I'm feeling pretty excited about developing the future. And, I think it's okay. For me, it's just a bit different to have an old ruckman playing on versus, if you've got an absolute stalwart in the forward line or in the midfield, at least you've got 3 or 4 other spots where you can play the young blokes next to them. Whereas in the ruck, you've really only got one main ruck spot. Sure, this year, at times we've played Cherry and Goldstein, but that's only really been out of necessity. I don't think our best side has both of them playing. I think our best side has a ruckman who's rucking 70 to 80% of the game, and then a tall forward like CCJ or Comben who is doing the other 20 to 30% of the game. So anyway, that's just a bit of a wait and watch on that situation. We'll take a quick look ahead to next week's game, our penultimate game for the year, and our last game in Melbourne. And it's actually our first match against Richmond for this year. So one of those quirky ones where we only play them at the very end of the year. We've got Richmond on Saturday, 1:45 at the G. Obviously, don't play at the G too often. Potentially, Richmond's still in the finals hunt, depending on how they go today. I'm recording on Sunday. Let me have a quick look at the current score. Yeah, so as I'm recording, it's quarter time in the St Kilda game, St Kilda Richmond, and St Kilda's ahead 30-13. So, look, if Richmond were to lose, it's going to be very hard for them to make the finals. But yeah, I guess to be honest, I'd love Richmond to lose today, so they've got a little bit less to play for next week, and that maybe gives us a chance. It's fantastic for us that Tom Lynch isn't playing. He's been a thorn in our side in the past, so obviously, you love to see the good players like him playing, but great for us, gives us a chance, and it's only Rewald is the tool in there that you've really got to worry about. Yeah, it's a winnable game. It's pretty similar to this Essendon game. Richmond are a middle tier side. They're losing those older players that have been fantastic for them over the past 6 or 7 years, but they've got some good young talent coming through, and obviously they've traded in Hopper and Taranto last year, and they've been quite successful. So it's an opportunity to win, not an expectation to win, but gosh, I would love to get Richmond or to get the Gold Coast over the next couple of weeks and just have some positivity from a win going into the off-season and the drafting and the trade period. I mean, we really, if we're any hope of keeping Ben Mackay, which I think deep down I don't think we are, I think we need to win one of these last games just to give him a winning feeling. Because these players that have been playing all year, they've been losing 19 games in a row. So whilst it might feel gut-wrenching for us watching it, if they're a player who cares, and I think the vast majority of players do care, it's not fun losing this many games in a row either, I'm sure. In terms of my early team changes and what I'm looking for, it's pretty hard to predict things this far out, but obviously Cunnington's going to be out having retired, so you take him out. I asked for it last week. I'm going to ask for it again. I think Tucker deserves a rest. Let's give him a game in the VFL, last VFL game for the year, and see if he can find some form there. Part of me wonders if he's staying in the side. And look, I'm just going to go off on a slight tangent here, but often the way that you convince players to come across in trades is that you're sort of saying to them, this is the role that we can see you playing. And part of me wonders if the reason that we've been so patient with him is that we feel like, look, we've got him over from Freo and we've guaranteed him this spot, and now we don't want to take it off him. Now, that's absolute hypothetical from me. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I would hope not, because I just don't think that his form has justified selection over the past couple of weeks. I do think he can be a good player for us, but he's out of form, so I'd love to see him back in the twos. And yeah, just the standard, let's see someone else other than Kane Turner. He's been fine, he's tackled well, but I feel like he's been back in now for 3 or 4 weeks, and it's nothing new from him, and we know what we're getting from him. So in terms of the ins, I think I'd love to see Lazaro get a full game. I know he wasn't good coming on as a sub, but I just don't think that's a fair ask of him. I'd prefer him to get a full game in the VFL or a full game in the AFL, so let's see him in properly. Will Phil needs to come back in, given that Cunnington is out. I think they're pretty much a straight swap, and I would love to see Blake Drury come in as well in that Turner role. I think he played 3 or 4 games in the middle part of the year. He's been back in the VFL. His form hasn't been amazing, but I'd love to see, we've got to make a decision on him in terms of if we're retaining him for next year. I'd love to see a game or two at the end here just to see what kind of development, how well he's developed over the year. And then same as what I said last week, if Coleman Jones is fit, I'd love to see him in for Goldie, but I don't think it's likely. I do wonder if they're just leaving him for the end of the year now. He wasn't even mentioned in last week's injury update, aside from his TBC on the list. And then in terms of, a sub, it's whatever. Like, I'd be happy for Turner or Howe to be a sub. Even maybe Tucker gets demoted to the sub. I don't spend too much time worrying about who the sub is. Hugh Greenwood is another one that could be a sub or something like that. So yeah, whatever from that perspective. But I do want to see Will Phil back in, and if we're going to give Lazaro a go, let's give him a full match. That is it for the podcast. It's another relatively long one, so hopefully you enjoyed. As I said earlier, there'll be a Ben Cunnington special out during the week, so look forward to that. And yeah, only 2 matches to go, North fans. It is a long season when you are losing this many in a row. But, as I said to someone, as I was lining up to go to the toilet at Marvel Stadium on the weekend, the losses make the wins so much sweeter. And there will come a time when, it's the shoes on the other foot. We just are in this long wait for it right now. So anyway, hope you all have a fantastic week. And yeah, I'll speak to you midweek and then speak to you after the Richmond game on Saturday. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. Please subscribe to the podcast on your app and give me a rating or a review if you can. I'd really appreciate it. You can find me on all social media at NorthPodShow. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, you name it, I'm there. I'll see you next episode.